Wow, that looks like just what I need. How much does it cost? How do I deploy it for my team? Will it work on an iPhone? Documentation may not be the first thing you think about when you decide to design a software product, but it is often the first thing your customer looks for when he takes an interest in it. This presentation is called Rethinking Automatic Document Generation in the Software Industry. And this is Frank Ware. I am a Kennesaw State University student, and this is my final paper for Software Engineering 6613, Requirements Engineering. The source of the statistical data that serves as the basis of this presentation is research and a paper written by Ahmad Agiani entitled Software Documentation, the Practitioner's Perspective. Documentation is not what most coders think of when they define their jobs. It's often neglected as a post-development issue. It's critical to ongoing software management, and it may be easier to automate than to manage. We want the documentation to come naturally out of the development process, not as an afterthought. The value of document automation has been recognized for some time. In fact, much of Oracle's documentation on Java comes from comments in the source code, and JavaDocs parses them and inserts them into a web page template that serves as the command reference. The result, while rather uninspiring, is functional. Also, Eclipse has a plugin called JAutoDoc that will generate those comments for you from the code. Database has a lot of tools for automatically creating visualizations of the data structures. Perhaps this is because those interactions are so fundamental to the design process. But there is definitely some room for tools to automate traceability and interactions with other coding and design documents. There is also a language called Markdown. It's similar to HTML, but not graphical. This makes it much easier to insert information into a Markdown document from comments in the code. And Markdown can be converted to HTML when you are ready to display the information as a web page. One of the biggest areas of automatic document generation is traceability, but it's only partially automated. By inserting formatted comments into the code, you can create links to high-level documents or items within a document. Associating a section of code to a user story, sprint, or requirement document in this way is not unusual. Traceability management software can then be used to visualize those relationships. Clearly, there's a long list of documents appropriate to the development activity, and some of those can be pulled directly from the code, such as the API reference. But can screen captures from validation testing be used to create a how-to guide or an installation guide? Can video captures be linked to the requirements and posted on YouTube? Can release notes, change logs, and development wikis serve as a basis for an FAQ or for migration guides? Can promotional information come from requirement specifications or a feasibility study? So not all documentation comes naturally or directly from the source code. As the technologies of natural language processing improve, creating documentation directly from a few core resources can become more automated and more unified. Today's standards do not favor long documents or books or procedures. We need actually, to go directly to the information that is appropriate to our interests. The paper by Mr. Agiani presented the results of 2 surveys of participants in the software development fields. The first survey identified the issues they face in their efforts to manage software documentation for their projects. A list of issues was presented to the participants to get their assessment of the importance of the problem and the frequency they faced it. Under the heading of correctness, the practitioner selected problems with tutorials, code examples, installation instructions, and code comments, while under completeness they found installation deployment guides missing, user documents, and developer guides. Unsurprisingly, completeness issues arose on larger, more complex, and summary collections of user-facing documentation. and outdated content showed more common in areas of new features, code changes, and version updates. While the first grouping of issues focused on factual content of documentation, the second grouping focused on qualities of beneficial and effective documentation. Under the heading of maintainability, the number one issue was surprising and valuable. Superfluous content was recognized as the most important and common issue in document maintenance, with duplicate content taking a close second. Clarity and conciseness took the top under readability. Accessibility, findability, and information organization took the charts under usability. Clearly, there is an issue with having what you need, everything you need, and nothing but what you need. Instinctively, the answer to that is traceability, and a real focus on limiting the documentation you publish to exactly what is needed by the target stakeholder. We can all breathe a sigh of relief now, because we aren't really talking about making our job harder or less interesting by managing or automating our documentation. And with this level of interest in the best qualities of documentation, the final grouping of issues with documentation is the process and the tools used to create it. As software engineers, we should be able to apply our art to our own production process. After decades of software development, our own industry seems to be realizing that we can work better if we automate what we do. But we have our own unique challenges. For one thing, our industry continues to push the boundaries of technology, and documentation simply doesn't keep up. For another, there is no basic system that applies to the software development activity. In business, we have the spreadsheet, SQL, texting and email protocols, which are all standardized, protocolized, but we don't really have a widely accepted standard of documentation. If we did, every development platform, every testing program, every code receptacle, and every app store would have an API that managed interactions with it. To be sure, we have adopted tools like the wiki, and there have been some attempts at developing a language of documentation. We can translate comments and source code into a web page, but that's nowhere near the level of automation we develop for other industries. Even the legal industry has standardized the variability of human law into a set of document templates customizable by each firm, for each client, and for each situation. In the final grouping of documentation issues in this research, the participants cited lack of time to write as the biggest issue. I personally conceptualize that as a human button. People never have enough time or enough money. You can't really discount it because it is a real issue, and many development teams get caught up in the trap of not planning resources for the documentation requirements. Lack of time is appropriately listed under the heading of documentation process, and it is followed by issues with reporting, organization of files, and traceability. Documentation tools seems to fall to the wayside, which seems to me to be a failure at introspection within the software industry. This isn't the first time today I've wandered from the underlying research and drawn my own conclusions, but perhaps we're missing the point if we just present the numbers without thinking it through. The second survey in this paper resulted in a heat map of the usefulness of various documents across a range of software engineering activities. This is a bit of a break from the first question, which seemed to naturally fall toward documentation in terms of customer support. After associating the document types with activities, participants were asked, why is each document type useful in that way? And they were asked for a list of specific items in each document type which are most useful. In combination with the first survey results, these answers helped to identify the practical value of various elements included in document files. But more importantly, they suggested solutions that can improve document value. To reduce the number of erroneous or missing documents, participants recommended using code elements to build diagrams of the code. For example, you can build a diagram of code flow by constructing it from method calls or module elements. Also, you can build diagrams from high-level design documents, like mapping software features to specific user stories. In addition, Participants suggested having the IDE, or the code receptacle, prompt the coder to add documents to his work when specific conditions are met. This allows these systems to help bootstrap the documentation process. And business rules, like requiring an update to comments when copying code or requiring document testing as part of verification testing, can make sure that the documentation is appropriate to the context. Another common challenge is having procedures specific to a software release, platform, or context. Also, as users attempt to find solutions online, they are likely to have suggestions about how to better communicate the context or the procedure. Automatic testing systems come into play here, and pulling documentation and screen captures from cross-platform testing can help improve the granularity and accuracy of user-level documentation. Users are likely to use the software in ways or in contexts that were not tested. Allowing them to contribute in the form of code or document testing can result in documents that are more understandable to the user. So let the users write their own procedures and recommendations to the coders and to other users. Finally, participants suggested some solutions to issues with traceability, document control, and organization. These issues have a lot to do with the usability and manageability of the documentation for several reasons. Documents or procedures applied on the wrong platform may not work, or they may have a different presentation of the user interface. Overwhelming complexity of documentation makes finding the correct solution more challenging and may make users seek help desk support when it really isn't needed. Code fixes are less likely to include document management or updates because they are done outside the context of larger code. For these reasons, financial planning should provide the necessary resources. Commitment of specific code should trigger document and traceability updates as well. Writing code comments can be required before any coding begins. This helps to clarify and communicate the interface as well. Documents should only include very specific content, and it should be defined for each document. And any code fix programming should follow the same documentation procedures as the original coding process. In the course of this presentation, we've covered a wide range of documentation challenges and offered some general ideas about how to take the pain out of solving them. But the main point is that documents can be generated automatically. In an agile world of extreme programming and Scrum Masters, product support documentation has become a casualty of progress. And in some cases, we just relabeled documentation as artifacts. But the typical Scrum artifacts have to do with software development, not maintenance and customer support. The value of these approaches to development is incalculable. But in a digital world of paperless information, we aren't talking about file cabinets full of paper or mildewed tomes of knowledge. But instead, we are creating viewports into the practicalities of user operations and customer support, as well as ongoing operations like sprint backlogs and testing feedback and results. With natural language processing, we can take a large collection of user reviews and find that nugget of valuable information. We can likewise inspect the searches that people use in an attempt to find information. With various sharing and social media platforms, we can create a web interface and control its content, visibility, and contributor authorization. To get started, we have to define the rules and build out a framework. Ideally, the systems take over from there. So let's automate the creation of our software maintenance content and elevate our support techs from chat participants to content managers. Let's build support documentation into the development process so that we can support the customer after the development is complete, and move our content management, our customer support documentation, into step with our agile development environments by building systems that use the content we already create.